For 23 years, I've served as the county coroner for Whitfield County, Georgia, a role preceded by an 8-year tenure as a deputy coroner in Fulton County. This early experience was under the tutelage of Dr. Raymond Mitchell, one of the Southeast's most revered forensic pathologists. Across 31 total years dedicated to studying the deceased, I've completed or overseen more than 4,200 autopsies. My investigations have spanned bodies retrieved from car accidents, drowning incidents, homicides, suicides, drug overdoses, and natural deaths of every conceivable type. Within this field, one develops a particular rapport with death. Not exactly comfort, but a professional, clinical detachment. By the time they arrive on my examination table, the deceased are no longer individuals. They are evidence. Intricate puzzles waiting to be solved, stories etched in tissue and bone that demand careful interpretation and meticulous documentation. You learn to look beyond the person who once inhabited the body, focusing acutely on the medical and legal inquiries that require resolution. I am Dr. Catherine Hernandez, holding medical degrees in pathology and forensic medicine from Emory University. I am board certified by the American Board of Pathology in both anatomic and forensic pathology. My expertise has led me to testify as an expert witness in over 200 criminal trials, and I have had the privilege of training numerous deputy coroners and medical students. Furthermore, I've contributed articles to forensic journals and presented at national conferences. I share this background so you understand that I am not easily startled. I am not susceptible to flights of fancy or supernatural beliefs. My faith lies in evidence, in science, and in rational explanations for phenomena that might initially appear inexplicable. My examination room has shown me sights that would haunt most individuals' dreams, bodies in states of decomposition and trauma that push the boundaries of human resilience to observe. Yet, none of it has ever truly instilled fear in me. Until March 2023, I would have unequivocally stated that I comprehended death. I could have meticulously described the physiological cascade that unfolds when a human body ceases functionality, the medical and legal definitions distinguishing the living from the dead, and the precise procedures and protocols we employ to establish that determination beyond any reasonable doubt. But then, I examined the body of Raymond Castellanos, and every certainty I held completely shattered. March 14, 2023 began as an uneventful Tuesday morning. I arrived at the Whitfield County Coroner's office at 7:30 a.m., as I do every workday. Our facility, a modern structure on the outskirts of Dalton, Georgia, was completed in 2015, replacing an antiquated morgue that had been in use since the 1970s. It encompasses our examination rooms, cold storage, administrative offices, and areas for evidence processing. Marcus Webb, my deputy coroner, was already present when I arrived. Marcus had been working alongside me for 6 years. He is a diligent and thorough professional who transitioned into this role after a career in hospital pathology. At 38, he is relatively young for a deputy coroner, but possesses the ideal temperament and meticulous attention to detail that the job demands. "Morning, Dr. Hernandez," he greeted me as I entered through the staff entrance. "We have 3 cases scheduled for today: a natural death from the nursing home, a probable suicide from yesterday evening, and a DOA from Memorial Hospital that came in overnight." DOA, or dead on arrival, is the term used when someone is pronounced dead at a hospital soon after being brought in by emergency services. Such cases frequently necessitate autopsies to ascertain the cause of death, particularly when circumstances are unclear or suspicious. "What do we know about the DOA?" I inquired, pouring coffee from the staff pot. Marcus referred to his intake log. Raymond Castellanos, 34-year-old male, found unresponsive at his home by his roommate yesterday evening around 6 p.m. Paramedics responded, performed CPR during transport. ER doctors worked him for approximately 40 minutes. Never achieved return of spontaneous circulation. Pronounced dead at 7:47 p.m. on March 13th. Hospital requested autopsy due to unclear cause of death. Young, apparently healthy male with no significant medical history. 34 was young for a sudden death, though not impossibly so. Undiagnosed heart conditions, brain aneurysms, or drug overdoses could all tragically affect individuals in their 30s without warning. We would ascertain the cause through thorough examination and toxicology. Let's begin with the nursing home case, I instructed. A straightforward, natural death. Then we'll proceed to the DOA. The nursing home autopsy was indeed straightforward. An 87-year-old woman with documented congestive heart failure and advanced diabetes. The examination confirmed heart failure as the immediate cause of death, with contributing conditions entirely consistent with her medical history. By 10:30 a.m., I had completed the autopsy, dictated my findings, and released the body to the funeral home. By 11 a.m., Marcus and I were preparing for Raymond Castellanos. The body had been in our cold storage since its arrival from Memorial Hospital around 1 a.m., which is standard protocol. We maintain our morgue refrigeration at 38 degrees Fahrenheit, a temperature that effectively slows decomposition and preserves tissue quality for examination. Marcus wheeled the body from storage into Examination Room 1, our primary autopsy suite. This room adheres to modern forensic standards, boasting stainless steel surfaces, extensive overhead surgical lighting, robust ventilation, and all necessary equipment for photography, X-ray imaging, and evidence collection. Every step is meticulously documented, recorded, and witnessed according to rigorous chain of custody protocols. I donned my personal protective equipment, surgical gown, face shield, and double gloves, and approached the examination table. Marcus had already transferred the body from the transport bag onto the steel table and was preparing our photography equipment. Raymond Castellanos lay supine under the brilliant overhead lights. He was a Hispanic male, approximately 5 feet 10 inches tall and weighing 180 pounds, with short black hair and a neatly trimmed beard. He appeared well-built and muscular, clearly someone who maintained his physical health. He wore the hospital gown that had remained on him during resuscitation attempts. "Let's get initial photographs and then remove the gown," I instructed. Marcus photographed the body from multiple angles while I conducted my initial visual assessment. I've cultivated a systematic approach to examining bodies, starting with an overall impression and gradually moving to specific details. Raymond's skin exhibited the waxy, pale appearance typical of recent deaths, with liver mortis, or post-mortem lividity, settled in his back and shoulders, consistent with him having lain supine since death. His eyes were closed, and his face appeared peaceful, devoid of the distorted expressions sometimes observed in traumatic or painful deaths. There were no immediately obvious signs of trauma, no wounds, no bruising, no marks that would suggest violence or accident. His arms, however, displayed evidence of 1-5 attempts from the hospital, with multiple puncture marks on both forearms where paramedics and ER staff had established lines during resuscitation. We carefully removed the hospital gown, bagging it as potential evidence. Beneath it, Raymond's body appeared healthy and well-maintained. He had several tattoos, a cross on his left shoulder, some text in Spanish on his right rib cage, and a sleeve of geometric designs on his left forearm. There were no unusual scarring or marks. "Body temperature?" I inquired. Marcus utilized our infrared thermometer to check multiple points, 41 degrees Fahrenheit, consistent with approximately 12 hours in cold storage. This was normal. Bodies in refrigeration equilibrate to the storage temperature within a few hours. Raymond had been deceased for over 15 hours by this point, ample time to reach 41 degrees. I commenced the external examination in earnest, working methodically from his head to his toes. I inspected his scalp, feeling for any injuries beneath the hair. I examined his eyes, gently pulling back the lids to check the conjunctiva and sclera. His pupils were dilated and fixed, a normal finding in death. I checked inside his mouth, noting some minor tongue trauma, likely from the intubation attempts at the hospital. I palpated his neck, feeling for fractures or abnormalities. Nothing unusual. I examined his chest, abdomen, and limbs. Everything seemed normal for a healthy 34-year-old male. "Let's get X-rays before we proceed," I stated. Marcus positioned our portable X-ray machine and captured images of the skull, chest, and abdomen. We reviewed them on the computer monitor. No obvious fractures, no foreign objects, no structural abnormalities that could explain sudden death. "Ready for internal examination?" Marcus asked. I nodded. "Let's proceed with the standard Y incision." The Y incision is the foundational technique in autopsies. It involves making cuts from each shoulder down to the sternum, followed by a long vertical cut extending from the sternum down to the pubic bone. This method allows for the opening of the chest and abdominal cavities, providing access to all major organs. I positioned my scalpel at Raymond's right shoulder and began the initial cut. The blade glided through the skin and subcutaneous tissue normally, precisely as it should in a body that had been deceased for 15 hours. But as I started the second cut, from his left shoulder toward the sternum, I encountered something that compelled me to pause. The tissue felt different. It lacked the conventional post-mortem firmness I would expect, displaying instead an unusual elasticity, a heightened resistance, akin to slicing through tissue that still possessed some tension. I continued the cut slowly, focusing intently. As I completed the left shoulder incision and initiated the long vertical cut down the sternum, this sensation intensified. The tissue was resisting far more than it should. "Marcus, come look at this," I urged. He stepped closer, observing as I carefully extended the incision. The tissue was separating normally, yet its appearance was off. The cut edges looked too pink, too fresh for a body that had been deceased for 15 hours. "Is that normal?" Marcus asked quietly. "No," I admitted. The appearance of the tissue suggested a very recent passing, within an hour or two, certainly not 15 hours. Following the Y incision, I meticulously peeled back the skin and chest wall, revealing the internal organs. This procedure demands utmost care to preserve tissue planes and requires thorough photographic documentation. As the chest cavity was opened, an astonishing sight brought me to a halt. The organs looked remarkably fresh, almost as if they were still functioning. The heart displayed a normal hue, starkly contrasting the expected grayish tone of death. The lungs were pink and appeared well perfused. Even the liver, visible beneath the diaphragm, exhibited the rich, dark red coloration of a healthy, active organ. "That's not right," Marcus uttered, his voice strained. "Dr. Hernandez, that looks like a living person's chest cavity." His observation was accurate. Over 23 years as a coroner, I had witnessed thousands of chest cavities in various stages of post-mortem transformation, but none resembled this. This was the sight one would typically encounter during surgery on a living patient. Reaching in with a gloved hand to palpate the heart, a standard part of the examination, I encountered something utterly implausible. Warmth. It wasn't merely room temperature, nor the 41 degrees measured on the body's surface. It was genuine warmth, like the lingering heat from very recent life. I instinctively withdrew my hand. "Marcus, recheck his core body temperature." Marcus retrieved our rectal thermometer, the standard instrument for measuring core temperature in the deceased. He inserted it, and we awaited the digital display. "Dr. Hernandez," he began, his voice trembling slightly. "It's reading 87 degrees. This was absolutely impossible. Deceased bodies cool at a predictable rate, roughly 1.5 degrees Fahrenheit per hour under normal conditions, and even faster when refrigerated. Raymond Castellanos had been deceased for over 15 hours, with 12 of those hours spent in refrigeration. His core temperature should have been near the storage temperature, perhaps 45 degrees at most. 87 degrees meant the body was warm, not a living 98.6 degrees, but considerably warmer than any decedent should be. "Check it again," I instructed. "Ensure the thermometer is functioning correctly." Marcus produced a second thermometer from our supplies and took another reading. 87.2 degrees. I stood there, grappling with the information my senses and instruments were providing. Every rational part of my brain insisted there had to be an explanation. Equipment malfunction, an error in the death certificate, something. "Let me check for a pulse," I said, fully aware of the absurdity of the suggestion. I reached into the chest cavity and placed my gloved fingers directly on Raymond's heart. In a living individual, one would feel rhythmic contractions. In a dead body, nothing. I felt nothing, no movement, no contraction. The heart was still, yet it was undeniably warm, impossibly so. "I will continue the examination," I announced, striving to maintain professional composure. "Document everything meticulously. There must be an explanation for these findings." I proceeded with the autopsy, systematically removing organs for examination and sampling. This process demands precision and care. Each organ is weighed, externally and internally examined, and tissue samples are taken for microscopic analysis and toxicology. The heart appeared entirely normal, devoid of any evidence of infarction, coronary artery disease, or structural abnormalities. For a 34-year-old male, this wasn't surprising, but it offered no explanation for his death. The lungs were clear, showing no signs of pneumonia, embolism, or other pathology. The liver, kidneys, and spleen all appeared normal. Even the brain, examined after the skull cap was removed, showed no evidence of bleeding, stroke, or trauma. Every organ I examined looked healthy, and, disturbingly, far too fresh for the established post-mortem interval. By 2 p.m., the internal examination was complete. I had tissue samples for microscopy, blood and fluid samples for toxicology, and photographs documenting every step. Yet, I lacked a cause of death, and I was left with the disquieting observation that Raymond Castellanos' body looked and felt far too alive for someone pronounced dead 15 hours prior. "What do we tell the family?" Marcus inquired as we began the post-autopsy procedures of replacing organs and suturing incisions. "We tell them the truth," I replied, "that the autopsy findings are pending toxicology and microscopic examination, that we found no obvious anatomical cause of death, and that we will have a complete report in 4 to 6 weeks. This was the standard response when an autopsy failed to immediately provide a cause of death. However, I had never given that answer while feeling so profoundly disturbed by my findings, or rather by my lack of findings. We transferred Raymond's now sutured and prepared body back to cold storage. As Marcus wheeled him away, I stood in the examination room, attempting to comprehend what I had just experienced. Pulling out my phone, I called Dr. Chen at Memorial Hospital, the ER physician who had pronounced Raymond dead. "Dr. Chen, this is Catherine Hernandez from the coroner's office. I've just completed the autopsy on Raymond Castellanos. I need to ask you some detailed questions about the resuscitation and pronouncement." "Of course," she responded. "What do you need?" "Walk me through exactly what happened when the paramedics brought him in." She explained that CPR had been administered during transport. Upon arrival, the patient had been in arrest for approximately 35 minutes, based on the timeline from when his roommate discovered him. They continued advanced cardiac life support, intubated him, established multiple IV lines, administered standard doses of epinephrine and atropine, and ran the full ACLS protocol. They worked on him for 40 minutes, but never got a rhythm, never got a pulse. A systole throughout, pupils fixed and dilated. No response to stimuli. She pronounced him at 7:47 p.m. "You're certain there was no pulse, no cardiac activity at all?" I pressed. "Absolutely certain. We had him on continuous cardiac monitoring, flatline the entire time. I personally checked for a pulse multiple times. Carotid, femoral, nothing." "Dr. Hernandez, why are you asking? What did you find?" "Did you check his body temperature at the time of death?" I inquired. "Yes, it's standard practice. Core temp was 94 degrees, hypothermic from the arrest and exposure time before his roommate found him." That made sense. Bodies in cardiac arrest lose heat rapidly. 94 degrees at the time of death, 15 hours ago. "And the body went directly to your morgue holding after pronouncement?" I asked. "Yes, we kept him there for about 5 hours, until your transport service picked him up around 1 a.m., standard protocol." I thanked her and hung up. So, Raymond had been genuinely dead by every medical definition for at least 15 hours. He had spent 12 of those hours in refrigerated storage, yet his body temperature was 87 degrees, and his organs looked impossibly fresh. I spent the remainder of that afternoon meticulously reviewing the case file, examining photographs, desperately seeking a rational explanation. I consulted forensic pathology textbooks, medical journals, and conferred with colleagues via email. Nothing provided an answer for what I had observed. At 5:30 p.m., I locked up the office and drove home, utterly exhausted and profoundly unsettled. I live alone in a small house in a quiet Dalton neighborhood, a mere 15-minute drive from the coroner's office. My husband had passed away 6 years prior from pancreatic cancer, and my daughter lives in Atlanta with her own family. Most evenings I return to an empty house, prepare a simple dinner, and spend a few hours reading medical journals or watching television before bed. That night, however, I found myself unable to focus on anything. My mind continually replayed the image of Raymond's warm heart, his pink lungs, the uncanny freshness of his organs. Eventually I abandoned the idea of dinner, poured a glass of wine, and attempted to read, but the words refused to register. Around 11 p.m. I finally went to bed, but sleep remained elusive. I lay in the dark, my mind racing through myriad possibilities. Some rare condition mimicking death, an error in the timeline, or some physiological phenomenon I had never encountered. At 1:47 a.m., my phone rang. I fumbled for it on my nightstand, momentarily disoriented, before seeing the caller ID, the coroner's office security system. "This is Dr. Hernandez." I answered. "Doctor Hernandez, this is Dave Wilson from Whitfield County Security." Dave was one of the contracted security guards monitoring our facility overnight. "I'm sorry to wake you, but I need you to come down here. There's something you need to see." "What's wrong?" I asked. I'm not sure how to explain this, ma'am. There are sounds coming from the cold storage. Thumping sounds, like someone's knocking from inside." My blood ran cold. "I'm on my way." I dressed quickly and drove to the office, my heart pounding. Bodies don't make sounds. Dead tissue doesn't move. But I remembered Raymond's warm organs, and a primal part of my brain screamed that something impossible was unfolding. I arrived at the facility at 2:15 a.m. Dave met me at the entrance, visibly shaken. "I'm sorry to call you, Dr. Hernandez, but this isn't normal. I've been doing security here for 3 years. I've never heard anything like this." I followed him through the administrative area to the morgue section. As we neared the cold storage room, I heard it. Thump, thump, thump. Heavy, deliberate sounds emanating from within the refrigeration unit. "How long has this been going on?" I asked. "Started about 20 minutes ago. Rhythmic, every few minutes. 3 thumps, then silence, then 3 more. I stood outside the cold storage door, listening. The thumping resumed. 3 distinct impacts, as if someone inside were hitting metal. Every professional instinct screamed that this was impossible. Yet my career had taught me to investigate anomalies, not dismiss them. I unlocked the cold storage door and pulled it open. A blast of cold air rolled out, carrying the sharp scent of disinfectant and the subtle aroma of refrigerated flesh. The storage room was a long, narrow space, with refrigerated compartments built into the walls on both sides. Our facility housed 6 bodies, each meticulously stored in its own sliding compartment. As I systematically moved through the room, inspecting each one, 5 compartments remained eerily silent, their occupants undisturbed. Compartment number 23, however, held Raymond Castanos. Standing before it, I again detected a rhythmic thumping, 3 distinct impacts emanating from within. "Open it," I instructed Dave. Fear etched on his face, he hesitated, asking, "Dr. Hernandez, are you certain?" My response was firm. "Open it." With a trembling hand, Dave grasped the handle and pulled. The drawer glided smoothly outward on its tracks, revealing Raymond Castanos precisely as we had positioned him 6 hours prior. A white sheet covered him from the neck down, his eyes closed, his face remarkably serene. Yet, as I watched, an undeniable movement rippled across his chest. It wasn't a mere twitch or a release of gas. His chest slowly but deliberately rose and fell, indicating a breath. Stumbling backward, I collided with the opposite wall. Dave gasped, retreating towards the exit. "That's not possible," I whispered, disbelief warring with the undeniable evidence before me. Raymond's chest continued its rhythmic motion. Rise, fall, rise, fall. Though slow, perhaps 4 or 5 breaths per minute, the respiratory movement was unmistakable. Professional training, however, soon eclipsed my terror. I pushed forward, pulling back the sheet and placing my hand over his chest, feeling through the surgical incisions I had meticulously closed just hours earlier. The sensation of his lungs expanding and contracting was palpable, despite the skin feeling refrigerator cold. I checked his carotid artery for a pulse. Nothing. Pressing my ear to his sutured chest, I strained for the slightest indication of a heartbeat. Only silence. Cardiac activity was entirely absent, yet he was breathing. It was physiologically impossible, occurring right before my eyes. "Call 911, I commanded Dave. "Tell them it's a possible medical emergency at the coroner's office, and send an ambulance immediately." As he darted for the phone, I remained, mesmerized by Raymond's silent, heartless respiration. My mind raced through medical literature, desperate for an explanation. Respiration without cardiac function is a paradox. The heart drives blood to the lungs, making breathing without it a futile and non-existent process. Yet it was undeniably happening. 12 minutes later, the ambulance arrived. The same paramedics who had attended to Raymond the day before wheeled in their gurney and equipment, their expressions a mixture of confusion and unease. "Doctor Hernandez, what's going on?" one asked. "Dispatch said you have a medical emergency at the morgue." "I need you to evaluate this patient," I replied, acutely aware of how absurd my words sounded. "He's showing respiratory activity despite being pronounced dead 15 hours ago." They cautiously approached Raymond. One paramedic checked for a pulse, while the other configured their cardiac monitor. The monitor reflected my earlier observation: asystole, a complete absence of electrical activity in the heart. Still, Raymond's chest continued its hypnotic rhythm. "This is impossible," the lead paramedic declared. "He has no pulse, no cardiac rhythm, but he's breathing." They promptly contacted Dr. Chen at Memorial Hospital, who arrived 30 minutes later, having been roused from her sleep. She meticulously examined Raymond, adhering to every medical protocol, checking and rechecking every parameter. "His core body temperature is 89 degrees, she announced, after taking a rectal reading. "That's up from 87 degrees at the autopsy. Catherine, his body is warming up." We stood around Raymond's open drawer in the cold storage, witnessing the impossible. A man breathing without a heartbeat, his body temperature slowly rising despite being in 38 degrees refrigeration. "We need to transport him to the hospital," Dr. Chen decided. "Put him in the ICU. Monitor him continuously. I have no idea what's happening, but if there's any possibility he's alive, we need to treat him as such." They transferred Raymond onto the gurney. As they wheeled him out, his eyes remained closed, his face peaceful, but his chest maintained that slow, steady breathing pattern. I followed them to Memorial Hospital, where Raymond was settled into ICU bed 7, enveloped by an array of monitoring equipment. Nurses and doctors gathered, whispering, their faces reflecting a profound inability to comprehend the spectacle before them. For the ensuing 6 hours, I remained in the ICU, observing Raymond Castellanos's impossible state. His body temperature incrementally climbed to 93 degrees, then stabilized. His breathing persisted at approximately 4 breaths per minute. His heart never beat. His brain showed no electrical activity on the EEG, and his pupils remained fixed and dilated. By every medical and legal definition, Raymond Castellanos was dead, yet he was breathing. At 8:47 a.m., Raymond's breathing abruptly changed. It grew irregular, gasping. The monitors displayed erratic fluctuations in the minimal physiological activity registered. Then, just as suddenly, everything ceased. His chest became still. The faint electrical noise on the monitors flatlined completely. Dr. Chen conducted a thorough examination. No pulse, no respirations, no response to any stimuli. Time of death, 8:47 a.m. "March 15th, 2023, she pronounced. This time he remained dead. The hospital retained Raymond's body for an additional 12 hours, continuously monitoring to ensure no recurrence. At 9 p.m. that evening, they finally released him back into my custody. 2 days later, I performed a second autopsy. The findings were even more unsettling than the first. Raymond's organs now exhibited the expected post-mortem changes for a body deceased for 3 days. The warmth had dissipated. The pink coloration had given way to the anticipated gray. However, I discovered something new in the microscopic tissue samples. Unusual cellular structures within his brainstem, specifically in the medulla oblongata, the region governing automatic functions like breathing. These cells displayed signs of recent activity, new protein synthesis, and metabolic indicators that should not exist in necrotic tissue. It was as if, during those hours he lay breathing without a heartbeat, his brainstem had somehow remained minimally functional, driving respiratory movements through a mechanism I could not explain. The toxicology report revealed trace amounts of an unusual compound in his blood, something the lab initially couldn't identify. After sending samples to the CDC for further analysis, they determined it was a synthetic peptide related to compounds used in experimental neurological research. I contacted Raymond's roommate, seeking to understand the origin of this compound. He informed me that Raymond had been participating in a clinical trial at a research facility near Atlanta, a study focused on neural regeneration and spinal cord injury treatment. I obtained Raymond's medical records from the study. He had been receiving injections of an experimental compound called NR7, designed to promote neural pathway development. The study was investigating whether this compound could aid in repairing damaged nervous tissue. According to the research documents, NR7 had shown some success in animal trials at preserving neural function even under extremely adverse conditions. The compound appeared to create temporary autonomous activity in brainstem cells, allowing basic functions to persist briefly even after higher brain function had ceased. The researchers had no idea that in a human subject, particularly one who had experienced sudden cardiac death, the compound might preserve brainstem function for hours after apparent death, creating a horrifying twilight state where the body breathed without truly living. Raymond Castellanos had died on March 13th at 7:47 p.m. His heart had stopped. His brain had shut down. He had been legally and medically deceased. But the NR7 in his system had kept his brain stem cells functioning independently, compelling his respiratory system to continue operating automatically, warming his body through cellular activity that should have been impossible. He had been dead, but not completely dead, breathing, but not living, trapped in some nightmarish space between states that medical science lacks proper terminology for. The clinical trial was immediately halted. The FDA launched an investigation. The research facility faced multiple lawsuits and ultimately closed. Yet none of that altered what I had witnessed. None of it erased the memory of standing in my cold storage at 2:30 in the morning, observing a dead man breathe. I have continued my work as the Whitfield County Coroner. I still perform autopsies, ascertain causes of death, and testify in court. But I have changed. I am more cautious now, more inclined to question my preconceived notions about death. I've learned that the boundary between life and death is not as distinct as we often assume. That medical science, despite its advancements, still doesn't fully grasp the exact moment when a person truly, finally, and irreversibly dies. Raymond Castellanos' official cause of death is recorded as cardiac arrest, secondary to an experimental drug reaction. The time of death is listed as March 13th, 2023, 7:47 p.m. the moment he was first pronounced dead in the emergency department. There is no mention in the official record of what transpired 15 hours later in my morgue. No documentation of the breathing, the impossible warmth, the hours he spent in that twilight state. The hospital administration and I concurred that certain details would generate more confusion than clarity. But I know what I saw. I know what I measured and documented in my private notes. And I know that sometimes, very rarely, death does not arrive all at once. Sometimes it comes in fragmented stages, with parts of the body refusing to accept what has happened, persisting through mechanisms we do not yet comprehend. Just last month, I examined a 29-year-old who succumbed to a drug overdose. A young, healthy body, sudden death. A seemingly routine case. But as I began the autopsy, I noticed the tissue possessed the same elastic resistance I had encountered with Raymond. The organs appeared too fresh, too pink. I immediately checked the core temperature. 86 degrees. I ceased the autopsy, closed the incisions, and placed the body under continuous observation, recognizing the eerie echoes of a haunting phenomenon. For 6 hours I observed and tracked. The body's temperature remained elevated. While there were no current signs of respiration or movement, an inexplicable factor sustained the body at a warmer temperature than typical. Eventually, the temperature decreased to expected levels, allowing me to finalize the autopsy. Toxicology reports revealed the presence of the same synthetic peptide in his bloodstream. He had been entangled in a different clinical trial, associated with an alternative research group, yet the neural preservation compound was identical. I have furnished reports on both instances to the CDC and FDA. Furthermore, I have drafted elaborate accounts for medical journals. My efforts have focused on alerting the forensic pathology community to the potential for these experimental compounds to engender complications for which we are ill-equipped. However, I often ponder how many bodies have been interred or cremated while still in such an ambiguous state. How many individuals have been declared deceased only for a segment of their nervous system to remain active, propelling involuntary processes for stretches of hours or even days thereafter? How many experienced the chilling embrace of morgue refrigeration while their brain stems persisted in their final, desperate attempts to cling to life? The mere contemplation of this keeps me awake at night. It isn't precisely fear, but rather a profound disquiet regarding the absolute certainty we often attribute to death. I continue my work in the morgue, meticulously performing autopsies and signing death certificates. Yet now, with each new examination, I introduce a pause. I scrutinize body temperature with heightened vigilance. I search for indications of activity that should be absent. I strain to detect sounds that inert tissue should not emit, for I have learned that death, much like life, frequently deviates from our preconceived notions. Sometimes, the body continues its struggle through pathways and mechanisms yet undiscovered by us. Sometimes individuals succumb, but not entirely, not instantaneously. And occasionally, upon opening that frigid storage drawer at 2:30 in the morning, one discovers that the deceased body is not quite as deceased as initially believed. Raymond Castellanos has been interred for 8 months. I attended his funeral, though I refrained from disclosing my observations to his family. What purpose would it serve? He is undeniably gone now, truly and finally deceased. His brainstem ultimately depleted whatever compound-driven energy had sustained its function, and he died peacefully a second time in the ICU. Yet he often occupies my thoughts. I recall those hours he spent in my cold storage, breathing without a heartbeat, his brainstem automatically firing, his body temperature impossibly rising despite the refrigeration. Was there any awareness lingering within him? Any consciousness ensnared in that decaying tissue? Or was it purely a continuation of mechanical cellular processes devoid of any subjective experience? I remain uncertain. I doubt anyone truly comprehends it, and that uncertainty haunts me more profoundly than any horror film or supernatural tale ever could. The coroner's office continues its regular operations. We still receive bodies, conduct examinations, and ascertain causes of death. But I have implemented supplemental monitoring in our cold storage. Temperature sensors, motion detectors, and audio recording devices. Just in case. Just in case another body that isn't quite deceased ends up on one of my examination tables. Just in case death, once again, chooses not to adhere to the rules we have prescribed for it, because I now grasp a truth I previously overlooked. Raymond Castellanos. Death is not a solitary moment, a singular instant when life ends. Death is a process, sometimes a protracted one, with various bodily systems ceasing function at differing rates. And occasionally, in exceedingly rare instances, one of these systems defiantly refuses to shut down. A segment of the body perseveres in its fight, its function, its relentless endeavor to sustain life, even after life has unequivocally departed. That is precisely what I encountered in my morgue that evening. Not a miracle, not a resurrection, but simply biology behaving in ways that defy our expectations, in ways that challenge our definitions and our certainties. The deceased body that was not dead, or, more precisely, the deceased body that was not